Okay, welcome to the February 27th, 2023 New Bern Board of Aldermen work session. I would ask Alderman Royal if she wouldn't mind opening us up in a word of prayer.
Thank you, Mayor. Let us pray. Father, we thank you today for yet another opportunity to gather together in your name to conduct city business. We pray today that we will be led by the Holy Spirit, that you would guide us, that whatever decisions are made or whatever the agenda might be, that we will consider the residents of our city and that we would make decisions in the best interest of them. We pray for your leadership, your guidance, and we pray, Father God, for oneness and unity among this board. Cause us today to be on one accord as we move forward, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Let's stand and say a prayer for our flag and country.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, if you would please call the roll.
Alderman Creel.
Here.
Alderman Royal.
Here.
Alderman Astor.
Here.
Mayor Odom.
Here.
Alderman Kinsey.
Here.
Alderman Best.
Present.
Alderman Brinson.
Here. Okay, the purpose of today's work session is to review several topics on the agenda, so we'll get started with item number 1, which is the discussion of Municipal Service District. Mr. Hughes.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Alderman, and as a reminder for the work session, there may be some things that come up that you want to give staff direction on. You're not going to be able to vote to act on anything during this. We have allocated 3 hours. If we get finished sooner, then so be it, but that's our time limit that we're looking at. So when it comes to Municipal Service District, we've got a PowerPoint we're going to show you. Okay, so back in 1973, municipal service districts were established under the Municipal Service District Act of 1973. The state statute that covers that, the purposes of an MSD, which are covered under State Statute 168-536, are for urban area revitalization projects, transit-oriented development projects, some drainage projects, downtown revitalization projects, construction of pedestrian malls, bike paths, overhead pedestrian walkways, sidewalk canopies, parking facilities on and off street, construction of public buildings, restrooms, docks, visitor centers, and things such as that. This is a map of the current MSD. The last time this map was adjusted was in 2014. It encompasses the Neuse River, part of the Trent River. It goes to the other side of the Hancock Street on the railroad tracks and the other side of Broad Street. When you look at the breakdown, it's basically 30% residential, 70% commercial. There are also nonprofit and government entities involved in there. The nonprofit and governmental entities do not contribute to the, I believe it's 0.1375 cents on the tax rate. So in doing our research, there are over 74 MSDs throughout the state. And so what you'll see on the screen are the highlighted ones that are in the same, basically, population as us. And that's Morrisville, Statesville, Sanford, Goldsboro, and Salisbury. And we looked at a variety of them, and you could see what they're charging for the tax rate for those entities. Some cities have multiple MSDs, such as Duck and Nag's Head. I think those were the ones that have the most. And what we've seen is how MSDs are managed statewide. And there are basically three different areas. One, an advisory board is set up. Two, there's no advisory board set up at all. Basically, recommendations just come to the governing board on how to spend certain funds. And in 2015, the North Carolina state legislature passed an amendment to this that would allow you to contract out with other entities to be able to operate the program. And so what we've seen with a lot of our comparable cities is they've contracted out with the Main Street groups to operate this. So those are the three basic ways you could look at operating an MSD. I'm going to give you an example of three of those MSDs as well. Wilmington, which is a much larger city than us, has an MSD, and they break their advisory board up very detailed on this. They have 14 members that represent a variety of interests. They do have a full-time staff member that works for the city that oversees that. They have 3 residents, all property owners. They have 2 large property owners, a hospitality representative, a real estate developer, a restaurant representative, a retail representative, a Wilmington Downtown Incorporated board member, and a member of the Downtown Business Alliance, a professional service representative, and a nightlight representative, and they have at-large representation, and the city manager serves as ex officio. Town of Morrisville, for example, same size as us, no board, and it's operated similar to us to where they have basically a special fund where the taxes go into, and then there's a determination on how those funds will be spent. Then we've got Sanford, and they work with their Downtown Economic Development Group, Downtown Sanford. That's a 13-member board. They have a city and a county liaison, and based on our understanding from them, they had to form an emeritus group because once people get on these boards like this, they don't want to get off. They want to still be able to contribute. However, they are non-voting. So we've started receiving a lot of emails from citizens on what they would like to see a makeup of, and staff is making the recommendation to the board that we have an advisory committee, not necessarily go under a Swiss bear or anything like that. And then we break it down with 30% residential property owners, 70% commercial property owners. And that can be further broken down, whether that be a representative from retail, restaurant, lodging, entertainment, have something for where the largest property owners can participate, and have at least 3 ex officio members with the city manager, the finance director, and the Swiss bear executive director be on that committee. Happy to start discussion on that and hear what you have to say. At the last meeting we had, there was conversation that whatever came out of this meeting, we would end up having a public meeting downtown to let the MSD property tax payers hear what we had to say, then gather their input so we can come back at a later meeting to make a final presentation on how this board would like to proceed with the MSD advisory group.
Board, questions or comments?
I do, Mayor.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm leaning more towards the MSD Advisory Board, since those are basically the citizens that pay the additional MSD tax. I think there should be a board comprised of those taxpayers. That's just how I feel about it. But I do think some type of board needs to be established.
Foster, what you've proposed, the 30% residential, 70% commercial, is that reflective of the composition of our district?
That is, and when the MSD was originally created, it was mainly commercial that were subject to that tax. And I believe it was in 2014 where that changed, where we enlarged the footprint and we included residential. But in what we've done with our calculations, that is how the breakdown is.
And do you have any recommendation at this point in terms of whether the committee members would be permanent appointments or serve various fixed terms?
You know, they need to have 3-year terms. Now, whether that be a 2 or 3 year term, that's something that we really need to study, because I think we're going to run into what we've seen with other cities. Once people are on there where they want to continue to stay, And when you're talking about property owners, that's a finite number of folks, and we've also got to look at the interest. There may be a lot of folks that are interested in serving on this committee. There may not be. We're really not going to know that until we hear from those citizens.
In conversation with the members of Ward 1, as far as ex officio members, have you heard anyone give direction as to who they would like to be ex officio members?
No, we will be meeting with the group after this meeting. We're going to set something up hopefully in the next week or so. We've only gotten an email or two from citizens that live in the MSD so far. And what I've seen is basically they're kind of copying what Wilmington does in their recommendation.
Because I've heard a lot of preliminary talk, and like I said, I just wanted to know, did you have a feel for ex officio members?
No, ma'am.
Foster, when did this change? Because I had an opportunity this morning to talk to one of our older city managers, Bill Hartley. And I asked him about it when we were through the conversation. And he was telling me that, for an example, he said Swiss Bear handled it. They handled it all. He said, if the city public works department had a project, then it would be presented to the Swiss Bear. Swiss Bear would present it to their board members, and then they would move forward with having town hall type sessions or open meetings with anyone that's a MSD taxpayer, and then they would make a decision and then bring it back to the Board of Aldermen for recommendation. Having another advisory committee, when I think we've got something already in place and it's the way it used to work, it's just, I'm just wondering the reason why we just don't utilize Swiss Bear. The other thing is who will appoint these members? Me being from Ward 3, trying to appoint someone from Ward 1, it might be a little hard to do.
Yes.
If we let Swiss Bear handle it and let them have the town hall meetings on the projects, and then if the downtown people wanted to do a project, they bring it to Swiss Bear. Swiss Bear goes through the same motion and then present it back to the City Board of Aldermen for approval.
So the first advisory board was established in 1985, and they were really never reconstituted after that. And that included 9 individuals and 2 in an advisory capacity. In the information that I have from the historical notes, we did see that Swiss Bear would traditionally have the meeting at their offices, but we haven't seen anything official where Swiss Bear basically took the lead on this in any of the documentation we've received. And while that may have happened, we don't have anything by a resolution or anything that states that. It may have just been folks that were interested in continuing to see downtown projects occur.
Well, I just think that since we already have a Swiss Bear board, the Swiss Bear is the one that initiated the MSD tax, is my understanding. It would just be simple for them to make the recommendations, involve the MSD residents and commercial owners, and then make their recommendations to this board.
Alderman Brinson.
So let me ask this question. Since the statute now allows Main Street programs to manage it, and Swiss Bear being a Main Street program, do we have any other examples of these cities that have MSDs managed by a Main Street program?
We talked to several. Statesville, Salisbury, Kinston are the 3 that come, and Burlington are also 4 that come to mind.
Okay, so they have their MSD managed
They either have a Main Street group or it's a downtown economic development group.
Okay.
Once you get above 50,000, you're not eligible for the Main Street program. So
Okay. So it's not unprecedented? is what
No.
you're saying.
Alderman Prill, feel free to chime in. I'm guessing that probably some of the residents would probably feel like Swiss Bear is more commercially driven and would not necessarily represent, and I don't know the makeup of Swiss Bear Board. I know there's a lot of people on there. I don't know if any of those folks are property or residential property owners on Swiss Bear. I don't know that. So that may be a question or concern that we would want to address.
I would expect that there would be some pushback from residential property owners. I've been told that they have approached Swiss Bear in the past, asking permission to join Swiss Bear, and have been told no. So I think there would be concern, I think, from residential property owners if this was turned over to the Swiss Bear.
I'll also just make the comment, I think everybody knows this, but it's probably worth repeating, that this is just an advisory board too. So no different than even planning and zoning. There's been, I don't think on this particular board, but on previous boards, planning and zoning would make a unanimous recommendation and this board would actually go against that. So that's always a possibility as well. So I received quite a bit of feedback from some folks when we put this out there that we were going to discuss this. And as you can imagine, some were for, some were against. They had various opinions on how it should be structured. But I also think we need to make sure that if we move forward in whatever direction or capacity we do, that those folks understand, again, that this is just an advisory committee, that if they pack the courtroom and they say, we want to do this, and that advisory committee agrees or disagrees with them, ultimately it's this board that's going to have to make those decisions. So just don't want them to get the impression that whatever they say is what's going to happen, because there's that delineation between the authority.
Well, I know I, for one, haven't had this discussion, probably need to get more information. I'm not looking at you, city manager, for this, but, you know, I probably need to make an appointment with Swiss Bear and get up to speed on what it is they do. I mean, I have a general idea, but, you know, probably need to learn more about it before deciding between courses of action.
I think that's a good idea. Maybe we need to have Swiss Bear come to us so we as a board can, maybe they can come and do a presentation or whatever, to the effects of what they may deem necessary for this advisory committee. But I do say, let me reiterate, as I said, I do think the taxpayers that's paying this additional tax need to have a voice and need to be part of this. Some of them need to be part of this advisory committee.
Well, it should be made up of 100% of the MSD taxpayers, wouldn't you think?
I don't know how many members you're gonna have on this advisory committee.
If you're gonna do it that way, I think, unless you pay it, you shouldn't have a voice in it. You know, it's that. I just still think it would be simpler for everybody if the Swiss Bear was to initiate it and call the town hall meetings and have the discussions as to what project they propose and then make a recommendation to us. You know, if any of the citizens want their voice is concerned, they have an alderman they can call.
There again, I think citizens that pay that tax needs to be involved 100% with this advisory board, committee, however, council, whatever is determined, whichever way we're gonna go. If I just feel they need a voice, they need to be heard, they need to be there so they can be part of making some decisions. I think Alderman Prill just said that there's problems with people wanting to join Swiss Bear and wasn't able to. So I just look at it from that, perspective.
And I agree, excuse me, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I agree 100%. I believe that residents who are the stakeholders and other involved residents should be the ones that comprise this MSD advisory committee. I strongly recommend it. And whatever we need to move forward, if, as Alderman Brinson said, he needs more information, but I agree with Alderman Creel, and again, Mayor Odom talked about the feedback. I've heard a lot of feedback also. And again, I believe there would be a lot of pushback if it was just a Swiss Bear entity. So, yeah, the citizens should be involved in it, absolutely.
Foster, one of your slides early on, I think it listed 3. It said no advisory committee, an advisory committee, and one that's managed by the Main Street. If we do the process of elimination, is anyone against saying that we don't think there should not be an advisory committee? So I think we all, I've kind of heard, I heard from Alderman Kinsey, but I think everybody agrees there should be some sort of committee. Do we all agree with that?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay. So we can eliminate the middle bullet. So what I would maybe recommend is providing Swiss Bear, since they are our Main Street downtown group, the opportunity to put together, let's say, a proposal, if you will, on what they would maybe do if they were given this opportunity, and then let staff. The Wilmington model, to me, I'm fine. The Wilmington model, I know that some of the feedback we received, Alderman Prill and I were on a lot of those emails, was it was too big. There's 14 people on there. I think Swiss Bear has close to 30 members, if I remember correctly, so I'm not sure that argument necessarily holds a lot of water, but I appreciated the way it was broken down by giving each one of those segments a voice in the discussion. And as long as it's proportionate with the commercial versus residential, the number of 14, I think, could probably be massaged. So if staff could maybe come back with a proposal of what you would think would be appropriate based off of our feedback, then at a future meeting, we could actually look at those 2 and then maybe make a decision. Any feedback from the board?
In that same setting, with Swiss Bear making a presentation, will any of the residents get that same opportunity in that setting?
We always have our petition of citizens where residents could come. The reason I'm a little bit hesitant on that is because I sent an email out, copied Alderman Prill and staff, and sent it to some folks that I knew could help spread the word. And 2 of the first emails I got back about the MSD was about the social district. And I had to explain to them that this was not, had anything to do with social district. This was about how the funding would be spent. And then we got some emails, at least I got, I think 2 or 3 back from folks that aren't even in the MSD boundaries. So they didn't understand that they didn't pay the tax. So once I explained to them that they weren't part of it, they said, okay, no problem. So as long as we have the ability to educate folks, because I don't really want someone to waste their time standing up here giving us their opinion if we all agree that if you're not an MSD taxpayer, you really shouldn't have a voice on the board. Does that make sense?
Foster, I'm assuming that the Talbot spot, that the city has closed on that.
We closed on that, I think, the first of last week. That's
Okay,
correct.
So the money from the sale is now in the MSD fund?
Yes, and we can tell you how much we currently have in the MSD account. So as of right now, the fund balance for MSD is $1,670,665.
So, given that level of money that's in the MSD, does state statute put any restrictions on the community in terms of how long that money can sit without being used?
There isn't anything in there about how long, but we do need to have a purpose for those funds that are being spent.
And that's a concern right now, is that because we've gone so long without a body making recommendations to the board, that we really don't have a purpose for that money. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's important that we keep moving forward to establish some kind of an advisory body so that we can make sure that we are in compliance with state statute.
Okay.
Something else that the board, I think, needs to keep in mind, not to be, I think, discussed or decided today by any means, but
Sir,
given
Alderman
the...
Prill,
Alderman Prill, I'm sure she can ask you to speak up.
can you speak in your mouth? Because of the noise back here, we can't hear you.
Let me interrupt you 1 second. We let them know last week that we're going to be having this meeting today, so we're trying to get them to go to the front of the building so it's not as loud here. And also want to let you know, the restroom on the second floor is closed. They basically have dismantled that, so you can just go downstairs to the main level if you need to. So I meant to tell you that earlier. Sorry about that.
So, yeah, just again, something to keep in mind as we continue discussing this is that with the proposed increase in property assessments that has been announced by the county, at some point in time, we will need to take a look at our existing rate and more than likely look at reducing that rate, at least based on the percentage of increase of assessed values. And possibly, given the fact that we don't have any projects that have been identified, we may want to even look at reducing that MSD rate even further so that we don't start accumulating essentially too much money in the MSD that doesn't have any specific purpose behind it. So just something to keep in mind. I mean, I've had a couple of residents, property owners, who are not in favor of the MSD rate itself and would like to see it go away. I'm not proposing that, but we will need to discuss at some point whether or not the rate needs to be reduced.
And Alderman Frill, I will tell you that on average, the tax that we pull in from the MSD is approximately $195,000 annually for that. Now, we do have debt service paying off several loans from that, some other ongoing expenses, and we can probably pull for you what that is as well.
While they're looking for that, I think it might be beneficial the next time this comes before us is to maybe have some examples of some of the projects that have been completed by the MSD. So like James Reed Lane is one, the underground conversion of underground utilities, the cobblestone or the sidewalks that have been all replaced, all that's been done. And in the past, instead of paying for all of that up front out of cash, I believe we financed those. So that could be some of the debt service you're referring to.
Definitely 2 streetscape projects have occurred. Obviously things to purchase trash cans. We've purchased some banners for a variety of things. We've also purchased a lot here at the corner of Hancock and South Front Street. The MSD originally purchased the Talbot's lot, so that's why the funds are going back into that. So some beautification projects that have occurred along the way, just like you said, James Reed Lane, Bern Plaza, they've gone to that as well.
And that's the purpose of the fund being created for those type of projects that has come about. When I first came on the board myself, those are the things that I learned that's what the project was all about, going around spiffing up the city. And with that being said, it has accomplished a lot, and there's more to accomplish. I guess it's just probably looking at how can we expand that.
Anything else on item 1A? Okay. Item 1B, Mr. Manager.
Okay, so as part of the discussion, Alderman Brinson actually asked the Downtown Advisory Council discussion to be put on this. If you'd like to.
Yeah, so bear with me. I put together a prepared statement, so I'll go ahead and read that to you. But basically, my original idea for a Downtown Advisory Council was to have a standing committee to which we as a board would refer topics for new ideas, discussion of issues, etc. This committee was based on the idea that for downtown issues, we need all the voices at the table: retail business, bar, restaurant business, hospitality business, and residents, similar to what you see with the Wilmington model, to develop a holistic and representative plan for whatever issue we give them. I've come around to the reasoning that having a standing committee is probably not a good idea, in that any given topic, we may not have the expertise of the right persons appointed to that committee. So therefore, I wish to continue the board's historical practice of standing up a committee for a specific topic using the parking committee from a few years ago as an example. We stood that committee up with a stated purpose and appointed people to the committee. Once that committee decided on its recommendations, the committee was disbanded, and the recommendations passed to Swiss Bear for final details and presentation to the Board of Aldermen. Therefore, I'd like to continue that practice. So really, this was kind of an opening idea to have that discussion here at the work session, but I've kind of backed off on that. But having stated that, I do think that this idea for a downtown advisory committee was not big enough. And this lends to our discussion about planning later on. So I'll go ahead and state those ideas now, but knowing that we'll talk about this later. While downtown seems to be the site where we have the biggest discussions about the future of New Bern, the rest of New Bern needs us to also focus on them. I truly believe that New Bern's on the edge of exponential growth. When I started looking at the statistics with my appointment to the New Bern Metropolitan Planning Organization, I was surprised to find out that New Bern is considered a mid-sized town, not the small town in which I grew up and still have in my head that we are. New Bern has just over 31,000 residents, and the MPO has just under 50,000 residents. The folks at the Chamber of Commerce would tell you that that 50,000 is the magic number. Once we sustain growth over that number, then the big box stores start looking at expanding to that area. And I think we're poised to get there quickly. We know that developers have plans on the shelf for more than 2,000 homes, both along US 70 south of the city and between highways 55 and 17 west of the city along the current and future 43 connector. I've already stated to you that I do not think the city of New Bern is properly staffed or structured to properly oversee this growth. We've continued to have problems with ingress, egress for neighborhoods and developments. We continue to have residents complain about shoddy developers. Don't get me wrong, we have several excellent ones out there that put up a great product, but we do not have the tools or the staff to enforce or monitor the troublesome ones. Neither do we have the ordinances or the planning to tie these neighborhoods together. And I'm not talking about electrical, sewer, or water. I'm talking about stormwater, bikeways, and traffic management. But why are we seeing this tremendous growth? Many will look at retirees and discovery of our southern charm and lifestyle in a post-COVID world. However, in my opinion, that only explains part of the picture. FRC East, the largest technical employer east of 95 at almost 4,000 civilian employees, is poised to grow over the next 10 years as the F-22s are fielded. And in broad terms, the Air Force is looking to offload their depot-level work of the Marine Force, and FRC East has the military construction money and the space to expand Cherry Point. While in the initial stages, they also started the initiative to move their helicopter depot work to the Global Transpark in Kinston. Now, if I was a potential FRC employee, I would live in New Bern because the completion of I-42, I'd be within 30 minutes of either site, could take promotions without having to move. And already in some of the military communities, they're calling the US 70 I-42 from Goldsboro to Kinston to Cherry Point as the North Carolina Aerospace Corridor. Craven County is also part of the Naval Tech Bridge Initiative, where Craven County is marrying universities and local contractors, both existing and startups, to meet military immediate needs. FRC East and Tech Bridge represent recession-proof growth because they're tied to the defense industry. And then take into account the highly successful initiatives that Craven County Business Development and C1A is having with the Craven County Industrial Park. Last year alone, they developed or expanded 200 more jobs. With the current industrial park reaching capacity, the county's already discussing expanding to another park. Where do you think those folks are going to live? They're going to live here in New Bern. On our tour of Bosch last week during the recent 25th anniversary, one of the employees remarked that it was difficult to expand or bring on another shift if they needed to because of the lack of workforce housing in New Bern. And this is everything that's being discussed. I don't think we've even touched the surface of what I-42 and having an interstate connection will mean to us. Suffice it to say that all of this is interrelated and in a supporting cycle: growth in housing, growth in industry, growth in commercial properties, commercial companies and growth in jobs. And I haven't even touched on what the concerns are of the supporting industries like healthcare and transportation. So what I'm proposing is, as we talk about our long-term planning for the city of New Bern, we need an advisory council. That New Bern Advisory Council should have business leaders, industry leaders, developers, residents, and staff, and maybe even county staff, to inform the planning efforts of their concerns and ideas going forward. Therefore, I'd like to further this discussion during the planning discussion we're having later today, because while I think a bottom-up planning review is an important and efficient to leverage the planning efforts of our staff has already made, I think we as a board should also take a higher level view to make sure those efforts incorporate our stakeholders' concerns and what our stakeholders say we need. Given that vision and perspective, we're not going to get what we need, what the city needs, solely from a staff effort. So having said all that, I'm walking back from a downtown advisory council, and really I think we need a planning advisory council for the city.
Okay. Board?
I think the idea or the concept that Alderman Brinson is bringing up is an important one. What I'd like to see, and I'm not sure just how best this can be done, would be to try to pull together representatives of some of the largest employers in the city who could meet periodically to discuss concerns that they have as employers in the community, and have that information passed back on to us so that we have a much better understanding as to issues and concerns that they are facing as the largest employers in the area. And I think that would fit very well into the city's planning efforts as we look forward, over the next 5 to 10 to 20 years. And it would help, I think, foster better planning efforts on our part and on the city's part to be able to engage representatives of these companies. So whether or not an advisory group that Mr. Brinson is talking about, whether that might be a mechanism to achieve that, I don't know. I think it's worth exploring a little bit further. But the bottom line is, I would like to try to figure out some way of getting the input, of these very key companies that really support New Bern.
I would say it'd probably be a good idea to invite Jeff Wood, maybe, to one of our meetings. So Jeff is the economic development manager that runs basically C1A. I know he has several of these councils. He has an industrial council. I think there's a military council, but they have these meetings periodically. Foster sits on the executive committee of C1A. You probably are more privy to some of the information than I am as a representative, but I know that they talk about some of their issues and concerns, and if it's not a regular or routine meeting that Jeff comes to address the board, maybe he could just update us with a quarterly communication with just some of the feedback that he receives, because I think that information is probably readily available already through different sources. Could be one avenue for us to explore. Any more comments on item B? Alderman Brinson, are you proposing something specific to put together for the board to consider?
Well, what I was proposing in our planning discussion for number 3 is, when we decide whether we're putting together whatever we're calling a strategic plan, comprehensive plan or master plan. Basically, to me, that plan would not be complete without having convened the types of individuals I was talking about.
Okay.
With not just their concerns, but also their feedback. So at least a 1 or 2 meetings, to get their concerns. And if you're saying that we can get all that from Jeff Wood, then okay. But I think that we at least at the end of this, or towards the end of this planning process, to get feedback from that committee I proposed, then that's more along the lines of what I'm thinking.
Okay.
To make sure we have addressed their concerns and their future growth in our plans of what we think New Bern ought to look like.
Okay, so it sounds like we're going to discuss that more under item number 3. So anything else on item 1B before we move on? Okay, we'll move on to item number 2, which is the discussion of the extraterritorial jurisdiction, also known as the ETJ.
Okay, Mayor, at this time, Jessica Lewis is going to be leading this discussion. Jessica.
All right, so I understand that we're going to be doing some conversation and having talks and other conversations about some strategic planning.
Can you cut the mic on? I think it. There we go.
Yes, thank you. And one of the things that I understand we're going to be looking at is our ETJ. So in the state of North Carolina, we have been allowed in cities to enforce zoning regulations since 1923, and then that was extended to counties in 1959. And at that time, in 1959, is when they came up with this thing called the ETJ. And at the time, that was a tool to be able to help enforce more intelligent growth, to be looking at what areas in the future may reasonably become a part of the city. And there's kind of been a trend over time that those lines move. Some places no longer want to be in the ETJ business, and we're going to start having that conversation on whether or not we'd like to consider eliminating our ETJ, which can be done relatively simply, or changing the line of our ETJ, which also is not a terribly complicated process, and looking at things like that. So a couple of things to note. The city of New Bern has 9 distinct ETJ areas. We've got here, this is the overall map. The hatched areas outlined in purple are the areas that are currently in our ETJ. Just for your knowledge, how far out your ETJ can go is based upon your population. So we have the maximum ability to go out 3 miles for our ETJ planning area. We don't do that anywhere. They are demonstrated here. We've got the 9 areas I'm going to roll through really quickly, and I can go back to them if we want to hone in on any certain area. Got Briarwood, Bridge Point, Rocky Run Road, the Trent Creek South, Trent Creek Road, Township 2 here, the US 70 Bosch area, Greenbrier, which is the largest one, and then Duck Creek. So a couple things to note. When we maintain that ETJ area, we are, as the city, now responsible in our case for providing services of all land use codes. So that includes planning, subdivisions, inspections, zoning, minimum housing, and floodplain management. So those are services that our staff is providing technically to non-city residents. So we look at all of those things. If you want to look at these different areas, there may be some areas where it is good planning practice to continue to provide those services because we envision that they may become part of our city boundary at some point, and there may be some areas where we can look at and say it may no longer be worth all of these resources we're spending to maintain that control of the planning in those areas. So if it was the desire and we had the direction to eliminate the ETJ, that doesn't mean that we can no longer process requests to annex in. That's still the right of different areas or subdivisions or anywhere that they're asking for to use our utilities. Just to throw that out there for you. We can't pick and choose the areas that we want to take in. They have to ask to come in, and we did confirm that in a conversation with the attorney last week. But to remove the ETJ line would simply require a public hearing on reversing the ordinance that was adopted to establish it. And that would be the same way that we would modify the line if we would like to maintain certain areas and eliminate other ones. And so with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have on this.
I have a question. Sure. You may have said this, and it may not have registered, but do people that live inside the ETJ, are they required to get building permits?
Yes, sir.
And we do all the inspections?
Yes, sir.
Commercial properties that are in the ETJ, do we have to do fire inspections on those buildings?
That's a great question. I would envision that yes, because they were in our planning jurisdiction, that we would be doing the fire inspections, because in many places the fire inspections are a part of planning.
Just one question. You said there were 9. Were all 9 of those called out in the action that the board took ever how many years ago?
The line, I'm certain, has been modified since that
Sure.
time. I'm not an expert. I'm sure when the last time that was, but we technically modify our line sort of every time we do an annexation as well.
Because I wasn't, personally, I didn't know Duck Creek was part of the ETJ. I don't know that we've ever discussed that. Any discussions? There's probably nothing that's happening over there, so I have no reason to come before us, but.
Well, Alice sent us a map, because I requested a map from Alice, and she sent us a map. Duck Creek came about in May of 2008.
Yeah, that was all part of that property that was going to be developed, I think, into a marina 20 years ago when they put the sewer line in across the river. This is off Sandy Point, correct?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Barbara, don't you remember when they put that sewer line in underneath the river to service that area over there, because that was all going to become a marina and a big subdivision and stuff, and all those plans fell through? I think it was Zach Taylor's property, actually. But
It was, but if we ran, or they ran sewer there, and they would ask to be on there, they would have to ask to be annexed based off of our ordinance.
yeah, but they just ran the main line under the river. When the people hooked up over there, they were annexed in. Probably the last one that's received city sewer over there that I can recall was Dr. Ashford's property, and we had to go over there, and he had to get annexed into the city before they would give it to him. But I'm interested, if you go back, you went through them kind of quick, is there anything on 70 East, the James City area? Bridgepoint.
The Bridgepoint.
That's it.
That's the only thing?
And see, that
The
kind
Bridge Point is in the city limits. It's the Outback Steakhouse, and then the condos at Trent Villa, those are in the ATJ, and that's the only thing heading down to Bern away.
because that's kind of what, looking at all of these kind of begs the question for me is, West New Bern is seeing tremendous growth, but also South New Bern, and there's no ETJs down there. I know that's the opposite question that we were discussing today, but
Go back a frame or two to where it showed the bridge point. Right there. And that's all the ETJ that's over in the James City area.
It's not even in the James City area, I'd say. I mean,
Well,
yeah, that's
on that side of the
basically on
river.
other side of the river, that's correct.
You mentioned the various services that the communities were receiving and the possibility, excuse me, if we decided that we did not, we wanted to move the boundaries or we did not want to participate here. If we do not provide the services, then how are they provided?
Well, then they would default to Craven County. So if we decided we wanted to start considering moving or eliminating this line to be good neighbors, I would ask to go have a meeting with their planning department. That everyone is required by state law to perform building inspections. So that would be a service that they would automatically have to start providing back in that area. You do not have to provide other land use laws, subdivision laws, zoning, regulations, things like that. Craven County is very pro-property rights and doesn't have a lot of those regulations that the city has. So in regards to those types of planning efforts, they just wouldn't exist because the county chooses not to enforce them.
And would you go back and name those services again?
Yes, so currently, right now, the city of New Bern is doing planning, subdivisions, inspections, zoning, minimum housing, and floodplain management in those areas.
We do not provide fire, police, public works, parks and recreation. So I'll go back to one of the recent discussions we had about the Rocky Run area, which I think probably sparked this whole discussion. There were some folks that were from that community, and there was a parcel of land that had been requested to be rezoned, and they felt like that that they were part of the city and that they had a representative on the board, when technically they don't. They have one, I think it's one now on planning and zoning. They used to have three. The ETJs used to have three representatives, and when the attorney looked at that, he said, Planning and Zoning Board is making decisions, probably, I'm going to guess and say 99% of the decisions they make are for city limits. And that one small faction, whenever they make a determination about something outside of the city limits, you were actually over-indexed with representation from the ETJ. So they had three voices on that board that were making decisions for things inside the city when they are not inside the city or city taxpayers. And there's a lot of confusion around that too, because one of the ladies that spoke that evening talked about our park that we had in Rocky Run, and I explained to her, we don't have a park in Rocky Run. She says, you do have a park. You guys installed it. It's not, it's the county. So the park at Rocky Run is the county's park because they provide all the services there. We just provide the oversight from an inspections and a development standpoint.
Jessica Foster, I've got sort of a loaded question to ask both of you. The ETG provides the city with at least a measure of control over areas that could potentially become part of the city in the future. Whether they ultimately do, we don't know, but they certainly could. So it's desirable to have at least some control over what's happening in those areas. Balancing that with the level of service that we are providing essentially at taxpayer cost for non-taxpayers that live in the ETJ. So the question is, in both of your opinions, do you feel that the ETJ provides sufficient value to the city that it should be maintained, or do you feel otherwise? So that's the unfair question to kind of ask you guys.
I think there's probably areas that are providing value, and there's probably areas where we can look at the map and know there's probably a realistic assumption they will never be pulled in and part of the city of New Bern. I'll throw on to that without actually answering your question. Anytime we're looking at changing the boundaries of the city, we want to look at where there's access to utilities and we can provide them, We want to look at the condition of existing infrastructure, paying particular close attention to the condition of roads, because in the state of North Carolina, counties do not control roads, but cities do. So any roads on the ground would likely become part of our system and become our responsibility to maintain if they were not in an HOA area. The workload to staff, everything has a cost. We look at growth, but as a really good thing, and it is when it's managed correctly. We want to make sure that when we have 3,000 new homes somewhere, we also have the right roads and schools and infrastructure and aren't scrambling to have to pay to support those new residents as well. And I think it's also important in this section of the world to look at the flood zones of properties that we're incorporating into the city, right? We get audited in our community ranking system every year on how we're managing floodplain, and the more acreage that we have in floodplains, it does hurt that score a little bit. And I'm stating that without even knowing exactly how much of the ETJ is in flood zone, but that is bringing in a lot more work into a department where there's a great deal of extra paperwork that we need to do for that resiliency and to maintain good standing with our flood insurance.
I think the ETJ was, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the ETJ was more beneficial to us when we were doing forced annexations instead of, we don't do that anymore. It's all, voluntary annexations. But I will say this, the county has no zoning, correct?
That's correct.
So it could protect the city limits in a way. Maybe right beside Greenbrier subdivision, if somebody right beside your house out there and just across the line, if somebody wanted to go out there and put a pig farm up, we would actually have control of whether or not that would be allowed. Is that correct?
That's right.
That's correct. I'm not an advocate of getting rid of any of those.
You're not what?
I'm not an advocate of getting rid of any of those ETJs on our side of town.
Okay. Now, I think it does have some benefits. It does cost us a little bit in services because we do have to provide fire inspections to the commercial properties. The good news is there's not that many commercial properties out there that would require a tremendous amount of resources from the fire department. We do gain money from issuing permits to build any of the other structures out there, but my biggest concern would be if maybe we need ETJ on my side of the river to protect my properties over there some too. I was one ready to do away with it, but I would hate to know that someone went bought the property right beside 10 or longleaf pines and decided to strip it down and put a pig farm in there. So, and right now we couldn't do anything about it because there's no ETJ over there. But
Well, let's be realistic. New Bern is going to continue to grow. 100 years from now, it's going to be much bigger than what it is now. We know that there's going to be growth for the foreseeable future out toward the west. And of course, there's a fine line when we're going south to where Havelock is, because we're going to have to find that happy medium there. We can probably go a little bit farther. But then you've got some swampland around the rivers and all that we'd have to look at, just like what Jessica was saying. What's realistic and what isn't. So it's definitely worth looking at. West of town, it's probably for the best to keep that. Some other areas, maybe not.
Yeah,
I would suggest that you have the city attorney look into whether or not we can have ETJ on 70 East. I remember there was some legislation passed years ago that we can't annex over there, and it may have been included in there that we cannot have ETJ. I don't know, but it's certainly. And I would also have the city attorney, if we're planning on doing away with anything, to look at the agreement between the contractor that paid to have that water line put in underneath the river and the Duck Creek property as to whether or not that can be dropped from the ETJ. Just worth looking into before we go much further over there on those properties.
Alderman Astor? I meant
Yeah.
Brinson.
Yeah, just to make a comment about the ones to the west, I mean, the one Rocky Run Road and the one Trent Creek Road is basically our boundaries with the town of River Bend. You know, if we were to get rid of those, then, you know, what's to say River Bend wouldn't take that over, because that's within 3 miles of theirs, so I think it's in our best interest to keep those. And then as far as US 70 Greenbrier, I mean, we know that there are plans to develop that area already. Those are the ones I alluded to in my statement. So there's no sense in getting rid of that, because those, once developed, end up getting annexed anyway. I'm not sure about the US 70 Bosch, but I think it's the same argument. Actually, it is, yes. So we know about plans on US 70 Bosch and US 70 Greenbrier. So that's what I would say about the ones on the west. I don't see any utility of getting rid of those. Even, I don't think it would be in the best interest of the residents of Rocky Run either to get rid of it. I don't think they have probably understood what we've said several times in here, that there would be no zoning if we got rid of the ETJ.
Jessica, what is the statute allows? Is it a certain mileage from your border?
Yes, so it is based on your population, and at 10,000 population, I think it goes out 1, 20,000, 2, and once you hit 30,000, you go out the maximum, you max out at the 3 miles that you can request that ETJ to go into.
So to Alderman Astor's point, if there is no regulation for some of his area, it may be worthwhile to look to maybe even add an ETJ on that side of town.
So you're saying that would be like 1 mile from his
I guess it
area?
could be up to 3 miles.
Or-
3 miles from the furthest end of the city limits, which would be somewhere around Blue Water Rise.
Okay.
So a 3 mile, if we want to do it. I mean, I don't know if we can do it, since I know that, like I said, the city, and do you recall when Mayor Bayless?
I don't remember if that covered an ETJ.
I don't either. I know it's, the legislation forbids us from annexing
Right.
over there, but I don't know as if it has anything to do with ETJ. If it didn't, my only concern would be, why isn't there ETJ over there if it wasn't the fact?
I'll check into it.
Is this something that we have to get the county involved?
I think to be good neighbors, we would engage the county in this discussion, because we are passing the buck back, so to say, on some services such as building inspections. I can tell you that our neighbors, the city of Jacksonville keeps once a year taking pieces of their ETJ that they don't want for whatever reason or another, mostly because it's areas that are very expensive to maintain and need a lot of enforcement action, and giving them back to the county and taking them out of the ETJ. Onslow County has a very robust zoning program, so out in Onslow County, if you're moving the ETJ line, you're still going to have some zoning and are offered that level of protection that you just referenced we wouldn't have here. But what would happen is, if we did eliminate the line, hypothetically, they would have 60 days to add any regulations they wanted to in those areas. And once that time passed, like, our regulations would be enforced, and we would continue to do what we do for those 60 days. And at that point in time, it just reverts back to their jurisdiction.
Well, it's not creating any problems for us. Once every year or so, we have someone comes up that's wanting to do some zoning, and we have to spend time on that. So,
Well, we'll give you an example. We had the demolition a couple months ago of some properties on Sandy Point
yeah.
in our ETJ. So You know, so it's not just zoning, it is those potential issues as well, that we're taking care of properties that aren't necessarily in the city of New Bern, but they
Well,
are in our ETJ.
I spoke to the manager about that.
Yeah.
I was strictly against us spending city tax dollars to demolish properties that's in the ETJ, and some of them weren't even in the ETJ, if I remember correctly, they were decided or something. Is that, I don't remember,
I think
maybe.
they were all in there.
Okay.
Well, you know, I agree. I think, especially when it comes to the dilapidated properties that we have in our city, I'd rather spend our funds in the city limits than
Sure.
outside this time.
Understand, but, you know, having talked to the county manager, they weren't gonna do anything with it because it was in our ETJ. So it's, to me, it's one of those, if you wanna manage those type of properties, we, as the city and the county, need to figure out who's gonna take care of them.
I think a lot of this goes back to what we touched on briefly earlier, is the strategic future of the city, where we want to grow. That's where we should be making sure we're protecting ourselves. I would just say off the cuff, I don't think that the area of Bridgeton is really a focus area for future growth in the city, because you're pretty much surrounded by Bridgeton there. But like in Alderman Astor's area, Alderman Brinson's area, there's a lot of opportunity where the city's going to continue to grow, and then those folks are going to pretty much be forced to ask to be part of the city because they're going to have our utilities. So, you know, I think maybe a cleanup of this area, you know, Briarwood Lane probably doesn't seem that significant, but it's surrounded by city property. So to me, I would think that we would want to protect ourselves or something like that. So, any more comments?
So, okay, we have these 9 areas of ETJ. So we're, for the management of these areas, so if, for instance, there is the Bridgeton, the Sandy Point issue that came upon us of those houses that we were going to demolish, that need to be demolished, is there not where we, since they're in our ETJ and we're as a city, we can impose some fees on them other than just permits?
Good question.
Huh?
That is a great question. I don't have the answer to that today.
I mean, they're in our ETJ, we as a city take responsibility because they're in our ETJ, and for demolishment purposes, I know they have to get permits and all this, you're charging for a permit, but for as demo in those properties, I mean, somebody, we can't just say that, well, it's gonna be the county's responsibility, we as a city need to impose some fees, I would think.
Right, correct. But since it's not a city property, that was why I had the discussion with the county manager, and he alluded to the fact that they may have taken that over for us to do the demolition, do the levies, because it's a county property, quote unquote. And so he was wanting to be in on the discussion before we started all the legal actions and sending them notices. But since we've gone down that point, we haven't really reached it, because my understanding was the property owner actually started demolishing that property, so we haven't reached that point where we need to levy a lien on it, and because we don't know if we can levy a lien on a non-city property.
Well, we're gonna
We haven't
provide a
got that
service.
far yet.
If we're gonna provide that service,
Not disagreeing with you, but
I know, I'm
my original concern was if we were gonna foreclose on that property, then there was no mechanism for the city to recoup anything either, because they're not paying city taxes. They're paying county taxes. And so would the county foreclose on a property at the request of the city when we weren't gonna get anything? So, anyway, those were all theoretical discussions because we didn't
Well,
reach that
don't
point.
we can't put the lien on a piece of property if we have to demolish it, and it's in the
Yes.
ETJ?
Yes, we
We
could,
can.
but think about the properties we sell when we talk about how much the county gets, you know, for, on average with any of those properties, it's 50% of tax value that we're getting. So any lien amounts that are on there are normally pretty much waived off to sell the property. So yes, we're not making any of that back.
I would venture to say that in the grand scheme of things, the cost, I mean, we're certainly not making money off of the ETJ but it shouldn't really be costing us a lot because the fees and the inspections and all of that's paid for, and we evaluate that every year to make sure that we're covering our costs. So, I don't think there's a huge financial implication on this decision one way or another. I think it's more of a strategic decision on whether or not we want the control over that future potential growth.
In dilapidated structures in an ETJ, the one that we're talking about, that's the first one that I can remember in a while coming up. So that's good as well.
Yeah.
But I just brought it up as a potential example, that's all.
So are there any more thoughts or comments from the board on item number 2 with respect to the ETJ? Any direction we want to give staff?
Just other than, would you check on the 70 East, basically my ward, to see if there's any limitations or restrictions as to putting ETJs over there?
Sure can, yes.
And we have 9 ETJs here. They may not be paying city taxes, but we've been providing services to these people for so long, these different areas for so long. I just can't see of us dissolving of the ETJs. I think it's a good thing that we are supporting these citizens, where I feel like they should be supported by Craven County, but to no avail. We are supporting these citizens, so I mean, at some point, and for the citizens to feel that we as a city are taking control of our ETJs, we're managing the ETJs. If the citizens have problems, as Alderman Astor mentioned, anybody can buy a piece of property and come in beside you and put up some structure that's not going to be amenable to the community. I just think we've been doing this. This map here looks like 1998 here. Why dissolve them now?
Staff good? Okay. We'll move on to item number 3, planning discussion. The first one looks like goals and objectives. Mr. Hughes.
So Mayor and Alderman, we're probably going to be doing all of our, I know Jessica and I are going to be hitting off one another for this. You're a brand new board, and as I've said before in conversations with each of you and also through emails, you've got basically 3 years to make a mark on what you would like to accomplish during this term. We are currently working off of 2018 goals and objectives. They're currently still on the website from the previous governing board. And so it's very important that this board have some planning and that you have some skin in the game on what you would like to accomplish. And so one of the things that, as I've told you, that I'd like to see occur is a strategic plan. And that's a vision that lays out where we are currently, where do we want to be, and the steps needed to get us there in the next 3 to 5 years. It's essentially a blueprint. How are we going to get there? What are we going to focus on? And it looks at our goals, our planned projects to achieve those goals, and the metrics to determine our success. Now, it's different than a master plan, which Jessica's going to talk about in a few more minutes, but it's really for this board and staff to look at and say, okay, when we're doing our budget every year, this is part of this, checking off the goals. And in the middle of January, I sent all the aldermen a form asking for your general goals and objectives that you would like to see accomplished. And we're going to talk about a few of those. But basically, what I saw was you want to see sidewalks, you want to see streets, and maybe you want to see the Pepsi Museum come to town, if that ever comes to be. You want to see, there was an adjustment, more revenues coming into the city, just a variety of things like that. Fire department, wanted to see another fire department out of West Newbern. Wanted to see a variety of projects, stormwater projects accomplished. And so staff also has those similar goals because they're looking at those projects right now. They're looking at the amount of grants that are currently available and how we can achieve those goals. But it's a little more than that. It's diving down a little bit deeper into those things. And one of the things we talked about was, well, why don't we combine all the strategic plans for the departments? Well, all departments don't have a strategic plan. and I sent everybody that. Currently, 4 departments have a strategic plan. That's GIS, Fire Rescue, Public Utilities, and Police. The Police Department was the only one that was not adopted by the governing board. So there's several other departments that don't have one, but this plan is specific to the governing board on what you would like to accomplish. And so we'd like to continue moving forward with this. And I just want to get all of your direction. We've talked individually about this, and we'll probably bring a consultant in to help us because it's a bear to work through this. It takes time, and staff is quite busy. And the goal would be to complete this in the next 3 to 6 months. That way we can implement this over the next 3 years and going into really 5 years. And I just want to have some conversations. Tell me how you feel about that, and go from there.
Board, do you have a list of the goals that we submitted?
This is not an all-inclusive list, by the way, but this would give you a very good idea. Ask him to pass that around. So I read some of them, but here's some others. A new electric substation for future growth and stability, new fire station for the West New Bern area, amphitheater, citywide paving, build an extension of Broad Street with pier promenade at the end, keep utility and tax rates flat, bring together all strategic plans throughout the city into one comprehensive plan, support the redevelopment commission or operate it internally, approve and initiate the citywide master plan urban design planning process, update departmental strategic plans that are outdated, develop a Pepsi museum, move forward with a plan to market the former Days Inn property with the goal of selling the property to a viable developer, replacement of culverts by the railroad tracks at Duffyfield Canal by Evergreen Cemetery, flood stormwater project in North Hills and Simmons Street, Duffyfield Canal bank stabilization and sidewalks. And so we're also, with goals and objectives, we just talked about the ETJ, but we're talking about strategic growth. We're also looking at facilities. We're having some issues we're outgrowing some of our facilities where staff work. So having to look at that over the next few years. Where are we going to go? We're going to look at consolidating to some centralized locations throughout the city, a variety of things.
Foster, how many of these items do you think can realistically be accomplished in 3 years? Considering we're on government time.
Yeah.
No offense to you all.
I'm going to make an announcement tomorrow night on one project, but when you're looking at sidewalks, when you're looking at stormwater projects, when you're looking at citywide paving, even the potential for this board to consider a fire station in the next 3 years based on how growth is going to continue at West New Bern, there's a good possibility that the majority of these goals can be accomplished because we're already working on several of them now. The big thing is, and we've been working on the electric substation. Electric Utilities has been working on plans and trying to acquire property for the next substation for the last year and a half. And as we've been working on that, the initial cost for that started out at $5 to $10 million, and that's almost doubled in that time. And so that's going to be a harder one to chew on. But we're also looking at some very good grant opportunities from the Department of Energy as well.
I would make a suggestion to the board for us to consider. I think the majority of these are all good projects, something we probably all could get behind. Staff would, I'm sure, need some time to do a little research on each one of these, to come back with some estimates and some more details. We didn't really have a retreat per se. I think we kind of had a work session earlier, but I think it'd probably be a good idea for us to consider having a retreat. That's typically when the board would set goals and objectives, have some good conversation and some deliberation amongst these. So I would offer that suggestion. We've got the list now. We can all go through these and sort of prioritize the ones that we feel and rank them. But at the end of the day, we definitely need a goal and a path on how we're going to get there. Because I don't think anyone, regardless of political ramifications, I don't think anyone wants to sit up here 3 years from now and say we didn't really accomplish anything. So that would be my suggestion.
Question. Foster, there's no time limit now on spending ARP funds. It
That's
was
correct.
26, but that was out because of, okay.
We've supplanted those funds.
Okay. Is there a time limit also on the allocation of monies we received from FEMA? The $32 million for Cat A and D work?
There is a time limit.
Okay, there is a time limit?
But again, what I want to remind everyone of is that golden magic number of 32 million, that was based on a formula of pulling a certain amount of dirt and debris and muck out of all the ditches. And in a lot of cases, when they did the design, they didn't have to pull that much out. So that's where we are with that. We've had a lot of conversation with our consultant. Can we add more ditches? Can we add more? And we really can't for that. We've still got to follow the FEMA's guidelines. So in theory, yes, we had 32 million to do that, but it didn't take 32 million to complete the projects.
So you tell me, you said complete the projects. You're telling me those projects are all completed?
Quite a few of them are complete. Now, they're just getting started on Cat D.
D.
Cat D.
Oh, okay.
It's
But the
still-
clean out is, that's done, I think.
Yeah.
But,
Okay, board,
Yes,
3A, any more discussion on that?
yes,
Okay,
if nobody else wants to chime in or whatever, but, yeah, I have some great concerns about that Duffy Field Canal. I mean, that canal runs all through the city, am I correct, Foster?
You're correct.
Okay, so if that canal runs all through the city and all of the sediment and all of the debris and all that stuff that we had from Hurricane Florence, and then when I go over and look at certain areas of that canal in my ward, I still see debris. And it's not debris that just happened within the last year or two. It's debris, you can tell it's old debris. So I'm confused about these companies that are going in and cleaning up this debris, why are they missing certain things, and it's going to be an issue for water flow?
That's going to be more of a question for George Childs,
Okay.
but in most cases, they didn't miss any debris. It all revolves around what qualified. And, you know, the conversations I've had with George, you may see overgrowth in some areas.
No, I'm not talking about overgrowth.
Okay, so if you're not talking about overgrowth, 'cause that's
no.
one of the biggest things we've heard, overgrowth. There's so much
Right.
overgrowth, but that doesn't really have an effect on the flow.
you know what, this don't need to become a FEMA discussion right here, because it's not supposed to be that, but I hear you. And I can take you to a ditch right now that a tree fell in during the hurricane, and it hasn't been touched. And it, you know, according to the records, the engineers went in it and said they couldn't qualify it as hurricane damage. And I scratched my head and asked them if they were absolutely crazy, you know. But anyway, it's done now, but I do want, the Duffield Canal bank stabilization, that's a Cat D project, right?
That is.
So the bank stabilization is gonna be taken care of. Now, how much of it is to be done is a different story.
Also, we have been receiving grants to basically rehab Duffield, the canal as well, on the sides and all. So we're getting planning dollars right now, because you gotta do the planning first, what it's gonna look like before you can go after the bricks and mortar grants. And so We've been very successful in getting several grants for that.
Now, again, are you talking about specific areas that was designated when the reps came out and looked at the canal that's gonna be included, or is this a bank stabilization for that canal, period, for that canal?
It's, on the grants, it's for specific areas that actually
Okay.
started around the Stanley White, old Stanley White Recreation Center area and is moving forward. So
Moving
that-
forward over to Evergreen?
That's correct.
Okay. And the reason why I stress so much on this is because I have citizens that live down beside that canal, and there's a property right there. Mayor, I sent you and I went over there and looked at that property. It's right there beside a big parcel of city property, actually 2 parcels of city property. And this homeowner is experiencing bank stabilization there. And this is something, it's not just a 2018 Hurricane Florence issue. It's been an issue. So, I think stuff like that needs to be included when we talk about Cat D work and bank stabilization. And I know maybe we can't use the FEMA $32 million to do it, but I really would like to see some grant funding going towards this. I mean, we're talking about citizens' homes there. I mean, you're not even, 1 or 2 feet away from your property. So that's a concern for me. And I just, all right, well, I'm not gonna dwell on this today because we're not talking about FEMA, but we are talking about citywide projects and goals. That's
So
it. That's it, Mayor.
what's our next move on these goals? I mean, do we want to discuss them all during, maybe each one of the board members send in their top 5 or something like that and have a session like a work session, or just keep them all and have a work session or retreat and discuss how we're going to do it? If so, it's going to probably be the only thing on the agenda. It's going to take a while to discuss each one of these projects and put a game plan together for it.
Well, I'll just, I'll make a comment. So citywide paving, for example, I think that's probably something we all like to see is continued investment in our street system, which is the number one
Yes.
piece of ownership that the city has is our street system. And several years ago, staff had an outside consultant come in and they did a prioritization and a ranking of the streets, and we used that for several years. And then I believe the last board decided they wanted a more equitable distribution. So instead of streets that were in worse condition that had more traffic on them getting addressed first, it was to make sure each ward got a fairly equal amount spent on them. I prefer the more objective approach where you look at a street that has 1,000 cars on it that is crumbling, and you address that versus a street that maybe is a little gray and would like to be black that only has 100 cars on it. So that's just an extreme example to prove the point. But what I would see, Alderman Astor, is for citywide paving that Mr. Childs could make a short presentation to the board on where we are, what we're doing, what the expectation is over the next 3 years. And typically we were trying to shoot for around $1 million a year in the budget to be spent on street resurfacing and repaving. So to me, that would be a fairly quick and to the point type presentation. Then you get into
And I think he has that list. I think
He does.
he has a consultant that, and now he's actually going to hire a consultant or to look at the ride quality of the road as well.
That's correct. Then you get into the one right underneath it, the amphitheater at Martin Marietta Park, which would be almost starting from scratch with some ideas and some concepts and some cost estimates and everything that goes along with that. The traffic, ingress, egress out of the park. I mean, there's a lot to that. You could probably spend a couple hours on that topic. So that's the reason I was suggesting if there's the board's fairly satisfied with this list, that staff could start working on putting some details together, then we can have a retreat or a work session where we could discuss them at length.
Yeah, I agree. Like the citywide paving, that's a matter of us funding, each year in the budget. And when we were doing $1 million a year, we were making some good progress. When you do $400,000 a year, you don't get much.
And sidewalks would be a part that I think that we, we already have a budget for that.
I'd rather fix the sidewalks we have instead of build new ones, but that's okay.
Well, and there's some areas that need sidewalks,
Depends on where you live.
and it depends on where you live. And over in my area on Garden Street, we were out looking at that area for trying to get a sidewalk put in, and Assistant City Manager, myself, and Mr. George Childs almost got run over by school buses. It's a really heavy traveled street, and the citizens need a sidewalk to walk on. But it seems like it's gonna be a complicated process of trying to get a sidewalk over there. But that's some of the needs. I just think we need sidewalks in some areas. That there's a lot of citizens that is utilizing, that walk, have no other way of getting from A to B to D or whatever, walking in those areas.
Well, we have a bike and pedestrian plan now, and I think the idea is we need to take that and prioritize it similar to what we have for the roads, and prioritize the projects that are in the bike and pedestrian plan.
No disrespect to you, sir. A pedestrian, MPO pedestrian plan over in the heart of Duffy Field, I can't see that. That's gonna take some major work. That's just my opinion, and we discussed this
You
before.
may not have seen the plan then.
Says what now?
You may not have read the plan then.
Yeah, it was a very thorough plan. They looked at things like the CNI information about where there was not vehicles, where there was more pedestrian traffic. There were some, and they sort of prioritized them. They didn't do every
Right.
single project,
Right.
but they prioritized one that was around the West Newbern Recreation Center. There was a greenway trail that I think we already own the property for. So they were looking at things that did not require right-of-way acquisitions to build that. So it was a pretty in-depth plan, but that's certainly something we could review at that time.
It's taking it to the next step and taking this plan and developing shovel-ready projects so that you can put in for grants in order to get it moving along. Right now, it's just a plan.
And Alderman Best, one of the big issues on the Garden Street area is just not enough right-of-way along the road to be able to put a 5-foot sidewalk on one side or the other. And that's what I think you've had some meetings with the assistant manager and with the public works director. That's been one of the issues they've had, because they've been over that corridor quite a few times, trying to come up with some options for that.
I'm surprised, I don't even know if the project has started or not, but the sidewalk project in Pembroke, I'm surprised that you don't run into maybe some of that same issues out there. I know back when I was interim public works director, we had a major issue trying to do something with a road out there because there's no right of way. Some of the existing ditches already on private property and that kind of stuff. That might become an issue when if they ever start putting your sidewalks in out there that Jamie wanted, if you continue with that.
Yes. So looking at the retreat, the thought of doing the retreat, I think that's a good idea. And again, I think it's a wonderful idea if we would like each one of us to maybe take 5 items off this list and highlight them and come together and see, again, what goals and objectives we can agree on, and then move forth with some strategic planning. Again, the staff can come back with the numbers and figures once we get some direction as to what we'd like to see achieved. I think that would be a good way to move forward.
Okay, we'll let, if you don't mind, staff can put together maybe some sort of ranking or prioritization. Just keep in mind, if we only pick 5 and we all collate, there's 17 items on the list. So if we only pick 5 and staff thinks that all 17 are viable projects, then some may get left off.
Okay, well then staff can just prioritize them.
Well,
We can prioritize.
there's some
myself.
stuff that staff won't even have to work on. I mean, again, citywide paving, that's a known. We've got a plan for that. We just have to fund it. Keep utility and tax rates. That's us. That's not staff. So the ARP funds, so flood stormwater project North Hills of Simmons Street, that's going to happen, right? I mean, so that, that doesn't feel it's bank stabilization. That's going to happen with FEMA funds. So there's quite a few of those that will, it's like build the new fire station in West Newbern. We know that's going to happen, right?
Based on the growth and the support of this board. And I do want to say, we get PAL bill funds every year, and on average, that's right at $400,000 to $500,000 that we use on paving alone. And in most cases, we'll almost double that, depending on what's going on that year. We do at least $200,000 to $300,000 in sidewalk projects a year as well. We have been blessed with ARPA funds. We've got a lot of sidewalk projects that are about ready to be implemented throughout the city, and that's going to be exciting as well to see that connectivity.
Okay, anything else?
So we're going to just wait until he gets everything together before we decide when we're going to meet on it? Is that?
Yeah,
Give them
because
time to work on it?
they're all working around budget as well. So some of this is going to coincide with the budget. So I would think the sooner you could get direction from the board on the things we want to accomplish, the better it's going to be, or easier for your budget process.
Good.
So I guess I'm lost. We talking 1 month? We talking 2 months? We talking 3 months?
I'm guessing sometime in the month of March.
Yes.
Yeah, before the budget.
Okay.
We'll get back. Probably won't be tomorrow night, but it'll probably be the first meeting in March where we'll come with the date. Cover me.
All right. B, strategic planning.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about strategic planning. We would like to really do an in-depth focus on that. And we are looking at bringing someone to help us with that. But it's going to be I think this board needs to have that. It'd be a good idea to really focus, not only just year to year, what goals you'd like to accomplish in the budget, but overall, how we can move the city forward.
Any comments from the board on strategic planning? It sounds like staff is looking to bring in a consultant to handle that process.
I'm not opposed to a consultant.
I like that one. Number C, letter C, moving on.
Okay, Jessica?
Sure. This is also tied directly into budgeting. Kind of walked into a situation where, due to the lack of a director for quite some time, and then before that, almost every document that we're working off of that guides our day-to-day work and our responsibilities needs to be updated. And so we've been talking a lot about comprehensive plans, and we've also been talking quite a bit about ordinances. We're required by the Coastal Area Management Act to have a comprehensive plan in the city of New Bern because we're in one of North Carolina's 20 coastal counties. And that's been that way since the 70s. And then moving even further, since 2021, we're required to have a comprehensive plan due to 160D, which is the merged city and county land use law that the state has. In any jurisdiction that enforces zoning has to have an up-to-date comprehensive plan. So we see those, and most of the time, those are plans that really check boxes. They're not always the most useful planning tools. They're not getting into the nitty-gritty and details on how we want to grow, how things are connected. They're looking at environmental areas. They're looking at your roads and things and your other adopted plans, and it kind of puts them all in one catalog, and that checks those boxes. And then we have our city ordinances, and here in the city of New Bern, for whatever reason, every land use ordinance we have has kind of been put into what's called Appendix A. And over time, they just kind of merged ordinance onto ordinance onto ordinance, and they're not all working together, and they're not working in concert and in harmony. And typically, standard planning practices, that type of ordinance gets updated every 10 years, and to my knowledge, the city of New Bern has never invested in doing a comprehensive rewrite of those ordinances. And so most of the things that I'm hearing and the goals from the conversations that I've had with some of you about the frustration with the planning are actually things I believe could be accommodated and fixed more effectively through updating our ordinances. And when I say that, it's because, and some of you have heard me say this already, a plan is just that. It's a plan. It's not the law. When you put something in the ordinance, it's enforceable and it's the law. If you want to see roads connected to other roads, put it in the ordinance. If you want to see certain aesthetics in a certain district in town, you put it in the ordinance. And at that point in time when we issue the permits, we can base that permit on whatever that regulation is. That's a very general overview. Creating a new comprehensive plan and creating a new land use ordinance are both time-consuming, lengthy, and expensive endeavors. And so as staff, I'm looking for some direction on what it is that you actually want to accomplish with land use planning, so I can determine in the budget whether to ask you all for funds to update those ordinances or to do more comprehensive planning.
So what you're saying is, let's say, for instance, we have a business here that's building, and you have another business beside them, and not to go onto the highway, that you have to have that in the ordinance to have that cut through. Is I'm asking that correctly? Or?
Yes and yes. So it would depend on whether you're on a state road or not. But when it comes to interconnectivity of city roads, we can absolutely require that. We can also look at stormwater. We can make all of these things laws through overlay districts in areas where they make sense. You have a lot of overlay districts right now. We may want to look at what's still effective, what's not. Maybe we want to completely start that over. But I am a pragmatist when it comes to land use, and the way to get things done, in my opinion, is to put them in that ordinance, because we can have the best plans in the world, but I can't require somebody to build what's in those plans. I can require you to build what's in the ordinances.
I have a question. Stormwater. I'm dealing with a bunch of stormwater issues in one of our neighborhoods now where the grading wasn't proper. So I think, and to find out from our building code officials that as long as the house or the property is graded from the foundation out 10 feet to flow away from the house, that's the end of it. That's all that the building code requires. But in some of these cases, they flow out 10 feet like they're supposed to, but then there's a big old hole in the middle of the property and all the water pulls up in there, and after it gets big enough or large enough, it comes out and spills over and comes into their house or up to their house. Can we do an ordinance which would require a positive flow of stormwater to the street and make them show a plan for each of these properties? Because right now, I mean, the only thing they have to do is worry about 10 feet from the house.
Short answer, yes. You can write an ordinance on anything you pretty much want about stormwater, down to the color of the French drain. However, we also have to consider that stormwater controls are expensive. They add on another layer of engineering most of the time.
Well, I mean, it's proper drainage. It's all it is. It's proper grading of the lot.
So most of the time, in many areas in here, the overall subdivision today, not in the past, but now, is required to be engineered, have the subdivision-wide stormwater controls that goes, if it's over an acre, it's going to the state to be approved, and you move on. If you look at our neighbors down on the Bogue Banks, they've taken stormwater further, like you're suggesting, and they require that you show, if you're adding fill or changing the grade on a lot, that you have that engineered, and also that you maintain a certain amount of water. It's usually 1.5 to 3 inches on site, and you will, that helps you out in like your regular storm, or maybe somewhat if you have one heavy rain. It's not going to accommodate you and solve all the world's problems in this area of the country. in a Florence, obviously, but it can help. To answer your question, yes, we can add more robust language and requirements in on individual properties. I would say on new homes, it would be very hard to accommodate that, in our existing areas. I think we also need to do a little more, pay more attention to what we're allowing to be developed and redeveloped in our floodplain areas. It's really a challenge in an area where we know we have so much floodplain and there's so much history in areas, balancing, maintaining that, and redeveloping in a sustainable and ethical way. It's very hard to build affordable housing for people in a floodplain. You're required to have just too much insurance if you have a mortgage. And these are things that we need to look at comprehensively, not just in a plan, but in our ordinances, in our laws that we can enforce. The ordinance is very disjointed. I'll take the sign ordinance, for example. If you want to find the answer to a question on temporary signage, there's two separate sections that address banners, for instance, and they both say different things about how to handle a banner. We just looked that up the other day. It's the same way on setbacks, and it's the same way in overlay districts, and the way the definitions are arranged, where some sections of the ordinance have their own definitions, and then there's a separate comprehensive section on definitions, and there's two different definitions. These are really inviting legal problems when you use our ordinance, and I would like to be proactive about fixing some of those issues that we have, and I think we're at a good time with all of this planning and the desire to see some of these improvements that I'm hearing from you to start working with a code writer who is an expert in making sure all the parts of the ordinances work together and moving us forward in that regard.
Alderman, I've had quite a few conversations with the city attorney on this. Both attorneys agree. It's long overdue that we really reevaluate all of those ordinances and come up with a better plan for that.
What's it gonna cost?
We haven't gotten any prices yet, but it's not going to be cheap. It's going to be a considerable amount, and it's probably going to take a year or more to actually complete. So if we do this, I anticipate phasing this in, hitting certain things at a certain time, and the board will continue to be getting ordinance updates, but we're going to have to address it.
So I have a really dumb question.
No question is a dumb question.
How many cities are in North Carolina?
There's 100 counties, but I'm not quite sure how many cities.
So there's a lot. That's my point. Why is it that we have to create all this from scratch? Why can't we just go to a city that has good ordinances and copy and paste?
I would absolutely suggest that that's where they kind of start this process. The interesting facet here is that there's so many overlay districts and so many different layers of planning in the city of New Bern, because we are in a CAMA area, we are in a flood area, we are in a historic area, we are in a growing area, that once you kind of take those base layer laws, then they start getting customized. And the really fun part about this is there's no way to look at all these ordinances and not take a good look at that zoning map as well, and what's allowed where, in the descriptions of all those districts, and what is and is not allowed, and to your point, how things are being constructed there when they're new. And this process would probably naturally, organically, to use that word, force us to look at that ETJ as well during this process. The good thing is, which I didn't think your question was dumb, it's a great question. When the state merged all the zoning law, the big benefit to doing that was that planning professionals and contractors and land use designers all started using the same language. They provided a ton of definitions. The definitions are a huge and important part of any ordinance because that's where you win and lose lawsuits on land use. Is this meeting this definition here? And so just by starting with using all of the definitions that the state now provides for us, saying, here's the definition, everywhere in the state of North Carolina, we're all going to call this a structure. We're all going to call this a building. That is a really good starting point there. And then comes the fun part of where you start customizing it to us here.
So you said it was not going to be cheap, Foster. Is that, what's the relative range? Are we talking about hundreds of thousands? Are we talking about millions? What?
My best guess, if we were to update, and if we were to take our whole, what we call Appendix A, the land use ordinance, which is every code that we have that deals with land use, I think you're probably looking at $250,000 in 2 years.
Okay.
I would advocate for, if we were to move forward with some ordinance updates, not to leave anything behind, because remember, these all should be working together. If this is referenced here, it should point you over here so you're not missing anything. An investment in this, I think, is an investment in good customer service because it's just going to be so much easier to navigate. That's how they're designed now, and that's why some people make so much money writing these. That we start looking at the zoning map, and we start by looking at what in many places would be referred to as the zoning ordinance, which is an article in Appendix A, but that is absolutely where I would start.
Okay. Alderman McKenzie.
It's just like in a subdivision that houses are so close together that we've had a person come before us talking about the drainage, and I think what you're saying and what Alderman Astor just brought about, that's something that we need to do quickly to avoid that sort of problem.
And we really don't have a standalone subdivision design section in our ordinance right now, and would probably benefit from one with how many are coming in here.
Right, we would benefit from it greatly if we had one in place.
Well, the problem is you get a great contractor, you don't have these problems. If you get a fly-by-night contractor, that's where you have all the problems. Because they're going to get by with doing it as little as possible. So,
And we don't have the ordinances to hold them accountable.
that's
Correct.
right. The only thing we've got is the building code, and they're all meeting the building code.
Absolutely.
They're just not doing an ounce over the building code. And I'm getting these complaints, and Foster knows because I've been passing them on. I've been getting these complaints all the time. And, it's just to retention ponds that are caving in and the grass is growing up head high around them, to holes in the backyard, and it's like a swimming pool when it rains. And I think they showed the picture in here the other day of a big turtle swimming across a lady's patio, from a rain. So
The other thing that's important when you're talking about this is the balance, because you can over-regulate and drive developers out. That's what happened to Havelock decades ago. That's the reason people don't build in Havelock anymore. So you have to, homeowners and property owners have to take a little bit of responsibility not to buy something that the precedent has been set that it's not a good investment for them. But, I'm sure there's probably opportunity for us to strengthen what we've got for sure.
So are we in favor in Foster looking into what it costs to hire a consultant to redo these codes and ordinances?
I am.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
So we'll include this as part of that budget process with development services.
Thanks for taking care of us. Thanks for letting us know.
Good news is I love fixing things.
Good.
Break time?
You'd like to do a break?
Sure.
Sure, you want to make a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second, take a, how long?
10.
10-minute recess. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we are in recess. Okay, board, we'll go ahead and get back started. We're now on item, I believe we wrapped up with 3D, so we'll move on to item number 4, financial update.
So Kim Upham's got a lot of good information to talk about, so Kim?
So, I'm just going to give you an overview of where we're at with our revenues and expenses. Just make sure you skip it. Is it revenues? Yep. Okay, so, looking at this chart, it basically shows you, based on the fund, general fund, water fund, sewer and electric, and solid waste on the side, so our general fund and utilities, and, how much we've received in actual and how much is remaining. And right now where we're at in the year, we're February, it's 67% in the year. But you need to consider that a lot of our revenues we receive 2 months behind, 3 months behind, so you won't quite see us at that 67%. Where we're at right now is exactly where we should be. We have so the utility bills, for example, they run behind a couple months. You're going to see about 50 to 60% is where that revenue should sit. The power bill, we receive that at 100%, so that offsets some of the alcohol beverage tax. We haven't received it. We won't receive it until May. So there's just so many things that that cause us to look a little skewed, I would say. We ran the numbers and did some projections, and basically overall we're sitting right where we expect to sit. Everything seems to be lining up, so there were no real big concerns.
Kim, what percentage, I'm sorry, what percentage of the 50 some odd million in the general fund is ad valorem?
Oh, I can pull that.
I was just curious because I thought that I was expecting us to be further along with that, considering the tax bills were due.
Well, we have we received our most of the taxes for sure, but there's a lot more than just the ad valorem taxes that impact that. So we have, for example, our local and sales tax that runs at least 2 months behind. We have only received 2 payments. Yeah, we've only received 2 quarters of the utility and the other miscellaneous taxes. A lot of that catches up. We get it later, and then we have to post it back to the fiscal year that it's for. And then the sewer, you'll see that that's one of the outliers, and that's mostly due to the fund balance transfer that we had for Township 7. We've allocated, the $4 million, I think it was $4 million for Township 7 sewer project, and we're not actually making that transfer until we see where we go. We're not going to send that over 100% of it, not right now when we have that intent to reimburse. We're not quite spending that just yet. That will really offset our cash flow for sewer. So that one is a little bit lower. That looks at like it's more of a 40%, I believe. Yes. But other than that, if you were to exclude that, we were sitting right where we expected on the sewer as well. And again, we reviewed it. We did a rough estimate. We projected to see where we would be at with our final budgets compared to what we budgeted, what our revised budget says right now, and we did not see anything that was anything that would be alarming. Are you good with moving on to expense? Okay.
Sure.
So the expenses, same thing. We did the final budget allocation projections, and there weren't any big surprises. There are a few adjustments that will be made that are interdepartmental or within the respective fund. At this time of the year, the average would be probably about 55 to 65%. Again, February puts us at 67%, but there's all of the February invoices aren't going to be paid at this point in time, and even some of January. We do have several things that we looked into that some bigger numbers and it's that are at back order that leaves us where that 55% made sense. The sewer again is reflected in here as well because of the Township 7 sewer. Township 7 sewer project. So this is the projects by department. We took all the projects, categorized them by department so that you could see where they're sitting. We have quite a few that have been spent. We have $34.8 million total budget for all projects, and that's for the life of the project. We've spent about $17.4 million. There's about $12 million encumbered, and our balance remaining in the project funds is about $5 million. The grants, we did the same thing, went ahead and provided you, this is more of an expense to date, does not include the encumbrances at this point, but encumbrances was about $1 million spread out throughout some of these grants. We have 44 active grants that's reporting here. Development Services has probably about 7.3 million of that, almost 10, or just over 10 that's listed, and Public Works has got probably about 3.6 million.
What are those large remaining balances for finance and development services?
So the finance one is ARP funds.
Okay.
And Development Services, they have recently received the 2.5.
Duffield Stormwater Project, 2.5 million, so a few things like that.
I don't really have that breakdown. We have 8 grants that have been submitted for review that are in the hopper that we've not received response back on yet.
And are we treating the FEMA funding from Stanley White as a grant?
No, that's in the, that's not on here.
Okay.
The next slide gives you a breakdown of the grant awards by purpose. So we categorize those into the sewer infrastructure, resiliency, public safety, MPO, miscellaneous grants. Those were probably a handful of grants that all fell under $150,000. Then the hazard mitigation, Duffy Field stormwater improvements and canal grants, the CDBG, and then the ARPA funds.
Kim, question.
Yes.
The 1.3 million for CDBG,
Yes.
that's accumulation of years of grants?
Yes.
Okay, okay, thank you.
You know, Alderman Best, we've had a challenge with spending those funds,
Okay.
something that I'm sure that department's going to be looking into to improve, because I'm personally tired of getting letters from the folks saying we have money that we haven't spent. So
You'll actually see some changes on that when the next plan is brought to the board for approval.
good, thank you.
Okay, the next set of slides, we're going into some debt overview, because that's going to be a hot topic coming up. We have a couple things that some key financial measures is the debt coverage ratio, and that's it basically shows the city's ability to pay for its long-term debts. Current bond covenants require a debt coverage ratio of 120%, and the city meets that requirement with ours at 165%.
Is that including your enterprise funds?
Yes.
Okay.
The Debt margin, so also per the bond covenants, the principal amount of installment debt cannot exceed 15% of net investment in capital assets. The city met the requirement with a 5.62%. I did run a calculation, and we would have about 27.4 million as of today. That would be some room for borrowing up to the max, I should say, of 27.4. But that number will change as our net assets change. So that's just kind of like a number as of today. Our legal debt margin is 8%, and it's a very large borrowing capacity that it's just unrealistic at 240 billion, 149 million, 300,000. So we have, this is you've seen this chart before. This is our total debt service over time, reporting for this year forward. We have about 3.7 million coming off from this year to next year. This is a breakdown of that by fund. The sewer, which is in the orange, is coming to an end. Electric is dwindling down and will be paid off in 2026. MSD, you asked about that earlier, and that balance is $566,657, and that will be paid off in 2027-28.
Does this include new funds such as the elevator and the Stanley White balance?
Not the Stanley White, we haven't borrowed on that yet. So the debt that's coming off this fiscal year, we have 1.3 million in almost 3 million in wastewater treatment plant, the aquatic center, swimming pool, downtown streetscape. That one is $432,125, and then the AMI electric and water sewer improvements is 1.9 million. We have a total of just under 3.7 million that is coming off. Last payment is June 1st. And then we're talking about, as that's coming off, our borrowing needs, our future borrowing needs. This year, we have some vehicles and equipment, and that's about 4.2 million. That includes some that were rolled over from last year due to back orders. We also have the Township 7 sewer project. Like I mentioned earlier, there is an intent to reimburse that we did. We don't expect to see the need to go out for borrowing until a little bit later, going into fiscal year 23-24. Then we have the Stanley White Recreation Center. We have $8 million for FEMA and insurance. And then the rest of that would need to be, we would need to do borrowing for. We actually have the electric substation, which was mentioned earlier, it was started off estimated at a $5 to $10 million project. It's now looking at 20+ million. There was a grant opportunity for the substation. The electric department submitted a concept paper, which is required in order to apply for the grant. The concept paper was accepted, and Charlie is now has permission to apply for the grant. So he's working on that grant application. It's due mid-April, and he is requesting funding for about approximately $20 to $22 million on that. And then vehicles and equipment for FY 23-24. We're just starting that budget, looking at that through the budget process, so I don't quite have a number. of what that would look like, but there's a lot of asks in that. And then going into further down the road, conversation with Jordan Hughes, he said that the wastewater treatment plant is about a $25 million to $30 million project. And he felt that the needs would be in fiscal year '28.
I know that everything these days seems to be delayed, but Alderman Astor, you were telling me last week that fire trucks are 3 years out?
4 years out, $2.5 million is what a ladder truck costs now, 4 years out.
So I don't know procedurally what we would need to do, but I would think we would want to have that on the radar, that we wouldn't start making payments, obviously, till we get it, which would be 4 years down the road, but want to make sure we keep that in consideration, because we've got one truck that's been in the shop, right? It stays, every time I go through James City, it seems like it's always over there at the repair shop.
The last 2 years, that's what we've been dealing with, whether it's police vehicles, dump trucks, or whatnot. And then, yeah, I've heard the horror stories on the fire trucks, and it's no end in sight, really, for that.
Some of the fleet's getting old, and it's the one that received the flooding during the hurricane is giving us a major problem.
Foster, looking at the future borrowing needs, of those items that were on the list, the previous exhibit, looking at like the Township 7 sewer project, the electric substation, the wastewater treatment plant, can we reasonably expect that we would be receiving grant funds to help offset some of those costs?
I believe we will be receiving grant funds for the majority of those. The question is going to be how much we receive.
Right.
For example, as Kim was saying, we have a good shot at applying for some grants for the electric substation, which would cover a considerable amount of that, because a lot of funding is opening up for energy-related projects. And that's the hope. And if we don't get that, then we've got to look at possibly pushing those projects back a little bit more, because we've got to be realistic. There is a debt ceiling that we have to work with, and it doesn't take much to add those numbers up, and you see we can exceed that pretty quickly.
It was unfortunate. I think it was a missed opportunity. Some of us had a meeting. I don't remember who was there when we went to Jordan's office. Bobby, I think you were there. We met with some neighboring townships and municipalities, because there's a lot of funding that's available to regionalize some of this water and sewer infrastructure. And I thought it was a productive meeting. Maybe I'm not a good poker player. I didn't read everybody very well, but it ended up going nowhere, because those other towns and municipalities that are nearby did not want to participate. We would have essentially, I'll try to make it simple, we would have created a board, a utilities board, that those different, and I'll just say Trenton, for example. Trenton would have had a representative on that board to speak for them, and we could have regionalized and got millions and millions of dollars in funding. But unfortunately, I don't think politics would have allowed that to happen based off of the participation from those other cities. So it was a big missed opportunity for the region.
It sounded good until everyone walked out the door.
So, as we've mentioned a couple times now, we're in the budget process. We started this in January. Just as a recap of where we've been in January and February, is we've been dealing with the capital improvement project requests, the building maintenance requests, any submissions of position changes were submitted to HR. The fee schedule change requests. We are currently working on the budget highlights and creating and designing those pages. That's a snapshot to your right. And then the budgets are being entered into Munis. to the software system. In March and June, we're looking at, March through June, we're looking at the departments will meet with the budget committee. We'll work on balancing that budget. City manager will do an overview and presentation of the budget in April. And then in May, the Board of Aldermen budget workshops will start. And then, of course, the board meeting on May 9th, and hopefully June 13th we'll have a adopted budget. We must adopt the budget by June 30th. And if there's any information that you would like along the way that's not within the calendar here, just shoot me an email and I can get that information to you. I'm not sure what you want in advance, sorry, I'm thirsty, in advance before the board meeting, but I can get you what you need.
Foster and Kim, one of the things that I would like to see in this year's budget, or at least some information that I'd like to see, is we all know that the budget's going to be a lot tougher this year, mainly because of the salary increases. You know, we've got to come up with ways of funding that. But one of the things that I keep hearing a lot about, for example, Jordan was telling me a while back that the chemicals that he's using have like quadrupled in price. Mm-hmm. So I would like for each of the departments to put a few of items together so we will have an idea of just what the increases are. For an example, I don't know, maybe the fire department would turnout gear. You know, couple years ago, we were buying $1,200 a set. Now it's $4,500 a set. You know, transformers. A couple years ago, we were $1,000. Now they're, I don't know, whatever they are now, $10,000. You know, I would like to see the daily expenses that our departments are having to spend money, the items they're having to spend money on, and how much the increase is in those items, so we can have a good idea of what we're going to have to do for this year's budget.
We can gladly give you that.
I know Alderman Royal had also said that she and I were talking about, and she thought like she would like to see that type of worksheet as well.
Yes.
We will never know until we see them.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, just the major items. It don't have to be the minor stuff.
We can do it. And as you all know, and if you have your own business, cost of doing business is continuing to escalate, and so it's really no difference with the city, and we're having to absorb those costs. And in some cases, maybe we didn't get a $100,000 dump truck. We've had to opt for a $60,000 used dump truck when we couldn't get one. So we've had to juggle things around for the last several years dealing with all of these issues.
Yeah, it's probably not going to be a good year to buy a lot of trucks and cars and stuff, other than the ones that we absolutely have to have because the price of them has gone crazy.
Alderman Brinson?
Yeah, just since we hadn't had a reevaluation since 2018, you know, and being new, where in this discussion in this budget process, do we start discussing tax rates?
This is getting ready to come up in just a second.
Sorry.
So the revenue neutral property tax rate is what you're referring to. What is it? It's intended to make the reappraisal and the rate setting process more transparent, but it can be quite complex, confusing. The purpose of it is to estimate the revenue for the next fiscal year for the revenue that you would have received, or for the next fiscal year on the current rate, if the reappraisal hadn't occurred. The calculation also includes an average annual growth rate on the tax base since the last appraisal, which ours was in 2016. And when we did the calculation, which you'll see, ours is estimated at approximately 3.1%. And again, these are all estimates because we don't really have the hard numbers yet. The rate is required to be calculated and published, but it's not required to be adopted. The revenue neutral calculation should only be done in the year of the evaluation. The revenue neutral tax rate refers to the aggregate tax burden for the city's entire jurisdiction, not just the individual taxpayer. I think there's some confusion around that, and it's important for you to know and to share out as well. Provided you a history of our tax rates and when we had an increase or decrease due to reevaluation or when the board had made that decision. And in 2008, we increased to, the board increased 0.50 from 0.47. And then in 2011, it decreased to 0.41. In 2017, we increased to 40.46, and that those two were due to a new revaluation. And then in 2019, there's another increase that the board made to 0.4822. Prior to 2008, it was in 2002. The 2008 increase I did find was 3.5 cents. According to the board meeting of June 12th, it noted that the last increase was in 1990. The county projected the tax base for us at, and this is an estimate only, of $4,422,540,000. And so our current, with that projected tax base, with our current tax rate would be the $21,325,000.
So Kim, that's correct information from the Creighton County tax
Yes.
that you're basing this off of?
They gave us a letter in January
Okay.
with just the estimated amount. It was about a 24% increase to the tax base.
I would say, last meeting I had announced, they said it was 36%. And having listened to the meeting last week, it's actually 42%. So
Yes,
it's gone up
finance just
quite a
hasn't
bit.
received the
No, I
official
got it. She
notice
said
yet.
January, but
I haven't received
I
any.
wanted to put that in context.
Yeah, I looked and I've not received anything more recent.
Yeah, it'll be up tomorrow night.
Yeah, we were hoping to receive the information, when I talked to the county manager, we were hoping to receive it this morning so we could give you the most up-to-date, accurate information.
So the next slide shows the calculation, and based on the information, of course, that I have today, it shows that it calculates the average growth in revenue since the last revaluation in 2016, which is 3.1%. And you'll see that down towards the bottom right of the chart. The tax rate to produce the equivalent levy to last year would be 0.3897%, and then the revenue neutral tax rate adjusted for growth would be 0.4018%. So that would result in an increase of $533,859 for a total levy of $17,767.
Kim, you said it was 3% growth factored in?
Yeah, 3.1. And of course, this will update with the new numbers as well. questions?
Any questions, board? So obviously, this 4.4 was based off of, was that the 36% estimate? So
It was off of 24%.
24. And you're saying it's
Yeah.
42?
It's 42.
Can you rerun this based off of that after tomorrow night when they have their, are they adopting that tomorrow night, Bob?
It's not that they've adopted it, it's happened already. They are gonna have it updated to the GIS website tomorrow night, and all of the notices will go out March 1st.
Okay.
So by the end of the week, everybody should have it in their box for
Okay.
their individual property. And there is, since we're talking about it, they did a pretty significant presentation on their meeting last week, and that is posted on YouTube. They've actually taken her presentation, the tax assessor's presentation, out of it, so you can find it on YouTube. And that was where she had stated that they were completely done, and the county average was 42%.
The county average was 42%?
Yes.
So that means there could be most likely some citizens in New Bern that are getting 50 or 60% increase?
Yes. Yes.
So I think it's important to mention this, and Kim had a bullet point in one of her previous slides, that we can set this tax rate to be revenue neutral at the city level, but it doesn't get down to the aggregate level of the actual taxpayer. So if someone's property tax went up and someone else's went down, we can set this rate as close as we can to revenue neutral at the city level, but they're still gonna see some fluctuations. So people are gonna see either a tax increase or a tax decrease, most likely based on their bill.
There was a question of how many properties went down, and the tax assessor couldn't answer that question, but my impression was it was very few. Some of them may have stayed the same, but anyway, that's all I'll say.
Okay. Is that all you had?
That's all I have right now.
We couldn't end on a better note?
So this will be addressed as we continue to work through the budget process, and we'll have very good conversations on the direction the board would like to get.
Could you take that last slide, and once you update that, share that with the board?
Sure.
That way we can go ahead and start getting our minds wrapped around that. Thank you. Board, any more questions for Ms. Ostrom on the financials? If not, we will move on to item number 5, discussion of the day's end property. Mr. Hughes.
So we have had discussions on the days in property for a while, and if memory serves me, in November of 2021, we looked at doing an RFP for this project, and at that time as well, we were looking at doing a CNI grant, and our consultant at the time said, hey, hold off on doing this grant, because if that property is developed, you can use that as leverage and have it toward a match for a $30 to $50 million grant. Well, as we have seen over the last year and a half, it's going to take the housing authority more than the next year, most likely, to get all their ducks in a row. That they've got a very good consultant now. They're working with FEMA and HUD to work through the Trent Court project and to hopefully get those funds encumbered. Because currently they don't have any funds encumbered, and so it's going to be a while that they go through that process. And so we need to look and see what the board would actually like to do with that days in property. We can sit on it like we have been for the last several years, or we could look at selling it. So just want to hear what the board would like to do, and any comments you have.
We ever had it appraised? Well, at least not a recent one, obviously.
Not recently.
I think the first step should be, let's get it appraised.
I'll share a story, maybe it'll get some conversation started. So the very first meeting I was in office was, I think, December 10th, 2013, and we went to a closed session, and it was about Alderman McKenzie will remember, it was about the day's end. What are we going to do? And as you can imagine, there were several people on the board, and there were some different thoughts and ideas about what to do with it. There were some that wanted the city to somehow try to acquire it and rehab it and get it weatherproofed again. There were some that said it should be demolished, because that's, I think, what the C&I plan calls for, is for that building not to be there. And I just asked a question. I said, well, or I made a statement. I said, sometimes you have to be careful what you ask for, because it might just happen. And so, obviously, everybody knows the story now. The city has ended up with it, and we never really did have a plan for it. We had talked one time about rehabbing it and putting city offices there. There were several different ideas. The Housing Authority looked at it about renovating it, but they didn't have the funding or the capability to do that either. So I don't know that there's very many plans or any developers that would probably look at that site and say it needs to be all housing. Most of the suggestions that we've heard from folks that have come in and looked at it has been some sort of mixed-use type opportunity. So I'm all for, let's get something going there. Number one, I think it's a hazard, because people traverse over that area, and it's very uneven. It's just a matter of time before somebody gets hurt. But number two, it is a cornerstone or corner piece of the Five Points area. And while I commend Crema Brew and what Danny Batten's done and some of the others in that area to revitalize it, it's a vacant canvas sitting there, and something needs to be done with it. So how we facilitate that is obviously up to the board. I think legally we're somewhat restricted. We can't put restrictions on it to say, hey, we will sell you this property if you do this. We've already been down that route in discussion several times. We can look at a private-public partnership potentially. We can't.
We cannot. It is not in the central business district. So currently, great example, we could do that with the Talbot lot property, because that was in the central business district, which is the C1 area. Where the Days Inn property is, that's zone C3. Now, could we extend the central business district? Yes, we could possibly look at doing that, and I had conversations with the city attorney about that today. But because it's not in that central business district that is currently defined in our ordinance, we can't do the dog and pony show. So
Well, yeah, we can't do the dog and pony show like we did with the Dunn building, but I thought that we as a government entity could go out and say, we want to see this happen, and we're willing to be partners in this deal, and then developers can come here. We have a financial vested interest in that. So I think we probably need to get some clarification on that, because we may say, hey, we want to put, the city may, I'm not advocating for this, but the city may say, we want to get into affordable housing business, and we want to get a developer to come in and put retail on the first floor and housing on the upstairs. So I think we need to probably get some direction from Mr. Davis's office on exactly what we can do. Well, you've got it?
Yep. And it's on downtown development projects specifically listed in the central business district. So, yeah, we covered this.
So the only way that we can do anything at the Days Inn property is the city's going to build something, or either we put it up for sale.
We can sell it doing the advertisement for sealed bids, the negotiated offer advertisement and upset bid process, public auction. It is currently in the redevelopment commission zone. We can give the property to them, since they can put restrictions on property. They could do what they wanted to with it. So if we wanted to look at adjusting the central business district, that would be how we would need to proceed.
Alderman McKenzie?
What about if the city builds something near office space for all the departments and take an interest in that corridor of the city?
Sure.
That's something that we could think about and look at and see what we could bring to the city itself.
Well, as I said, when we were talking about strategic planning, one of the things we're going to have to look at is where are we going to put our staff? I'm going to give you some great examples. Development services, human resources, they're busting at the seams in their current location. The CAPS building office for finance, and you pay your power bills at. I mean, that building is slap full. I would love to bring more people into City Hall, but based how the configuration is, I can't bring a whole department in here. I can bring department heads in, like we did previously, but we found out that it's better for our finance director to be with her finance staff as opposed to being here, because she's got the hands on it, can see what's going on there. So yeah, we're definitely looking at that as we continue to move forward.
Alderman Brinson?
So what are the geographic limits of our central business district now?
Currently, it encompasses Hancock, Middle Street, a portion of South Front Street, and a portion of Broad Street for C1.
So basically the MSD,
No, almost a quarter of the MSD.
only a quarter.
Question. The back parking lot, excuse me, the back parking lot is that owned by, is it TAPMAT or I see
The
parking?
city of New Bern owns that, and
Is it leased or something?
no, it is not. We deemed that a public parking lot, but also when the governing board at the time agreed to make that a public parking lot, that was on the condition that could be sold at any time or developed at any time.
So from Broad Street to Pollock Street
That's correct.
is what we're looking at.
That's correct.
Foster, has anybody talked with the redevelopment commission? Because I know at one point in time they was talking about actually utilizing that lot with a developer and trying to make like offices downstairs and apartments upstairs. Has
So
there been any talks about that with
No,
them?
from my understanding, when the redevelopment commission was formed, the governing board at that time decided to pull that piece of property out of that redevelopment zone. I have seen their plans on what a developer did come to speak with them, and they passed that on. That's pretty much where it died when we started looking at some other things with that property.
Okay.
Foster, was that the plan for the architect out of Raleigh?
Yes, it
had-
was.
So
Yes.
that, if I remember correctly, he had two phases. One was without the Habitat property, and the other one was with the Habitat property, and it was affordable multifamily houses and then retail and office on the first floor.
That's correct.
I mean, that was a great plan, but based off of what you just said from our attorney, we could put it on the fair market. If they end up buying it and they build it, great. If not, they buy it and they do nothing with it. That's it. We can't put any restrictions on it.
So then this next step again, as Alderman Astor said, is to get it appraised.
I mean, we can get it appraised, put it on the market, just like we did in the Tower lot. We don't have to sell it. If something else comes in, we don't have to sell it, but I'm ready to move it. It's not doing anybody any good sitting there vacant, other than the people that are parking over there.
How's the board feel about giving staff direction on getting an appraisal done?
And looking at building, if everybody's busting out a scene and you got lots there and you have buildings to sell, that would be a good spot.
Alderman Friel, you were going to say something? Or maybe not. Okay.
Even if we build, do we not still need the appraisal or see what we're working with, or it's not required?
Yeah, it wouldn't be required if the city decided we wanted to build something there. I think the cost of building something is going to be pretty high right now. Yeah. So I'm in favor of getting an appraisal done just so we can see what we're working with.
That's
Don't
right.
mind.
That's
3,
right.
4,
I agree.
okay, it's a majority anyway, so. Anything else on that one?
That's it. And it's 10 till 4, so we're just getting you out in time today.
Board, we've got opportunity, we've got a few minutes left. If anybody has anything, it's not necessarily on the agenda, but if anything relevant to what we've discussed today.
I just want to say, recognize Miss Kathy Adolph out here. She's one of our lawyer dedicated citizens. Thank you for joining us today.
She's a recent winner of the North Carolina Education Lottery as well, as I read.
Oh.
Congratulations to her.
You want to buy the Days Inn property?
Okay, if there's nothing else, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
They move.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. We are adjourned.